Good morning. Please join me in our responsive call to worship. We come together celebrating our unity with all human beings and with all creation. For God has created us and all that exists. We come together celebrating our diversity, for our differences can lead us into conversation about our faith and the way we live in the world. We come together to worship, knowing that God is present here and that all are welcome in this sacred space.
You fill up my senses like a night in a forest, like the mountains in springtime, like a walk in the rain, like a storm in the desert, like a sleepy blue ocean. You fill up my senses, come fill me again. Come, let me love you. Let me give my life to you. Let me drown in your laughter. Let me die in your arms. Let me lay down beside you. Let me always be with you. Come, let me love you. Come, love me again. You fill up my senses like a night in the forest, like the mountains in springtime, like a walk in the rain, like a storm in the desert, like a sleepy blue ocean. You fill up my senses, come fill me again.
This is a song that Barbara specifically requested, both songs. And when I started preparing them, I realized that they really weren't going to sound very good on the piano. So I'm really grateful that John was able to come and help me out at the last minute.
opt into kindness, make one connection used to divide us. It echoes all over the world. Every time you choose one more morning, goodness or meanness, life has one warning. It echoes all over the world. When a leader gets the hungry fed food, when you just make love inside your bedroom, it echoes all over the world.
Good morning again. It is such a delight to be here at Fountain Street. This is my first time here, and I am thrilled to be part of your community today. And I'm very excited because you are obviously a unique community and that you're willing to come out on a Sunday morning to talk about sex. So thank you for that. According to a recent study of college students, men think about sex as often as once every 4 minutes, and women as often as once every 10 minutes. So I'm the one speaker in your summer series who's going to encourage you to let your minds wander. Many of us have discovered, perhaps through a process of trial and error, that on the whole, sex is good. And good sex is a gift. Sex might be one of the most pleasurable experiences many of us ever participate in. We are sexual beings, and our body, no matter the size, shape, age, or condition, are beautiful. Sex serves a lot of purposes. Procreation is one, pleasure is another, feeling loved, accepted, and finding emotional fulfillment is another. Sex can also play a role in our spiritual journey. Some people choose the path of sexual celibacy. Despite overwhelming messages to the contrary, you can be whole without a sexual partner. And all the world's religions honor that path of life. Others choose to follow the path of sexual transcendence, where they leave the boundaries of their individual bodies to experience firsthand the creative impulse of the universe. But sex alone is no guarantee of transcendence. In order for sex to be a gift, two people must make themselves vulnerable to each other. It can't be had when one is being exploited or when love is withheld. It can't be had when sex is being used as a means to any other end than mutual reverence and delight. What a fine line there is between sex that heals and sex that harms. And trying to hold those two realities together is difficult. Healthy and whole sex recognizes that we bring together our body and our spirit. We have this wonderful model of healthy sexuality in the book, the Christian scripture, the Song of Songs, which Elizabeth read so nicely for us this morning. The Song of Songs is this wonderful erotic poetry that speaks graphically and compellingly about the beauty of the human body, the goodness of sexual desire, and the power of love. And yet, how often do we see any church using this text to educate young people or even old people about the exquisite value of sexual intimacy? We can attribute a lot of our sexual hang-ups to St. Augustine. He lived around 400 AD, and he is credited with the idea of original sin. Augustine struggled with his own sexual desires and impulses, so that led him to conclude that our sex drive was so primitive that we had no emotional or spiritual control over it at all. Thus, it was original sin. Negative attitudes about sex create fear, and fear is passed on by well-meaning parents, teachers, and leaders. The warnings are all around us. A lot of the sexual taboos have gone away, and many people are enjoying and presumably enjoying sex. They're having it. We hope they're enjoying it. And yet many of the taboos, the echoes of Augustine continue. Sex is dangerous. Sexual desire is wrong. Male sexuality is predatory and uncontrollable. Female sexuality is evil and destructive. It's the task of every civilized human being to confine sex within very narrow limits. As a result of the negative messages that we hear by well-intentioned people, many of us absorb those negative ideas ourselves before we're even aware of the process. And as a result, we can have a lot of difficulty sorting out our sexual lives in the years to come. Today, our society is largely polarized between the idea that sex is sin on one hand and that sex is sport on the other. So how do we find our way to that middle ground where we celebrate our sexuality while treating it with moral integrity? A space I've started calling sex-tegrity. Elizabeth referenced one of the books that I've written, and that's the purpose of that book. My own story is that I moved with my family in second grade into a very isolated neighborhood. It was a new suburban development. There weren't any kids around at all. And I had a highly over-sexualized childhood. It included being raised in a house that was filled with my father's pornography and being sexually abused by neighbors. Those things, in addition to other experiences and the overwhelming messages in my culture, led me to believe that nobody would be interested in me unless they had access to me physically. But I was also raised with a very strict moral teaching that I was not to have sex unless I was married. This was simply not up for discussion or debate. And as a result, I made some pretty devastating choices with my life. My problem wasn't that I had sex with a lot of people. My problem was that I felt compelled to marry anyone I had sex with. I have found that my story isn't that unique. And I share it now not because I want to bring that kind of attention to myself, but because I want to do my part in creating an atmosphere where we can talk openly, honestly, and above all, realistically about what it is to be a sexual being in the world today, so that we can heal and get on with living healthy sexual lives. Now, when I was going to high school, and granted, that was several decades ago, the risk that the girls were always trying not to fall into was being labeled a prude on one hand or a slut on the other. Now, I think for the most part, those labels are not out there as much. I think there's almost an expectation that we'll have at least one sexual encounter by the time we end high school. And there's also a healthy respect for abstinence. But that doesn't mean that our young people have figured out sex, or that they've even begun to think about how they will make decisions regarding their sexuality. It's a complicated world to navigate. I think the greater risk for our youth today is the trivialization of sex. They're simply inundated with adult sexual content from a very early age. It's in the movies they watch, the music they listen to, and the porn that they view. And make no mistake about it, our children are watching porn. Does anybody know the average age of exposure to internet pornography now? The average age is 11 years old, and it's moving down to 10. Long before high school, our 4th and 5th graders are firing up their laptops, their tablets, their smartphones, and watching any number of sexual acts. What they're not watching is anything to give them tools to deal with their own sexuality. As a result, our kids are growing up with distorted ideas about sex. What real people like, even what real people look like in the act. How can we hope to have any impact at all on their choices? How can we hope to impart to them the idea of the sacredness of sharing ourselves physically with another human being when they're inundated with so many messages to the contrary? Well, the only way we have any hope of that at all is by having these conversations. We have to be willing to talk candidly to young people. We need to talk about our bodies, naming the parts, and talking about the goodness of sex. And we do that by starting with recognizing the goodness of our own bodies and the goodness of sex. I contend that it's time we move beyond a marriage ethic. A marriage ethic is what I was raised with. That's the idea that if you're married, sex is okay, and if you're not married, sex is wrong. This ethic has nothing to say to our young people, like I used to be. It has nothing to say to the widowed or the divorced. It has nothing to say to gay and lesbian individuals who aren't even allowed to get married in most of our country. It has nothing to say to the single disabled or the single elderly. In fact, it has nothing to say to anybody who isn't married. And at the same time, it implicitly condones a whole host of abusive, demeaning, and controlling behaviors as long as they take place within a legally recognized union. A sexual ethic, on the other hand, begins by recognizing that every human being, no matter their gender identity, their sexual orientation, their physical capacity, or their marital status, has the right to experience sex as part of a healthy and life-giving part of their existence. A sexual ethic requires intentionality and discernment as we determine how we will be sexual beings in the world today. We need to have these conversations with our youth, and we need to have them without imparting shame. Our young people need us to guide them, not belittle them, and not patronize them. Sex is not a trivial matter unless we allow it to be. So what are the aspects of a sexual ethic? Well, a sexual ethic does require some degree of emotional and physical maturity. We need to start by having a sense of self-identity. We are not going to find ourselves in sex. A sexual ethic also requires a level of responsibility for protecting ourselves and our partner from sexually transmitted disease and from unplanned pregnancy. It requires that the power between two people be equal so that we don't risk somebody taking advantage of somebody else. A sexual ethic requires a degree of relational intimacy, at least enough to have this kind of conversation and to be very clear about the nature of a relationship and any commitment we're willing or not willing to make. And then we need to be able to talk honestly with each other if those circumstances change. A sexual ethic also recognizes that sex is both other enriching and self-liberating. Sex is a gift we give and that we receive. It's meant to be a joyous celebration without feelings of guilt and remorse. Sexual energy is the most powerful force in the world, a rich treasure of joy and happiness and passion. But it remains a virtue only to the degree that we exercise it with wisdom and compassion and understanding. Sex asks something of us, that we live our lives more fully and manifest ourselves more transparently. As we grow and mature, we can find even richer and deeper meaning in our sexual experiences. So there's something that I want to ask of you today and in the days to come. I ask that you would love your bodies, relish sex, and marvel in this very good gift, so that you might know the joy of being a body fully united to spirit, the wonder of being a truly whole and holy person. Namaste.